super predator is a young juvenile criminal who is so impulsive, so remorseless, that he can kill, rape, maim without giving it a second thought.
Help people. It don't help nobody.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Byron Pitts. Our conversation today are with the interruptors. We've heard a lot about how people get into the system, what happens to them once they're there, the difficulty in getting on with their lives afterwards. Our conversation will be about how do we prevent that? How do we keep them from going to prison? The United States incarcerates more children than any developing nation on earth. Statistics show that incarceration as a child is the greatest predictor of adult incarceration. I'm here with three women who are approaching this issue from multiple angles. Sally Hazelgrove, founder of the Crushers Club, a boxing gym on the south side of Chicago, which serves an alternative to gang involvement for at-risk young people. Carmen Perez is the executive director of the Gathering for Justice. She's worked on gang intervention in the prisons of El Salvador as a youth probation officer and as a national organizer of finding alternatives to violence and incarceration. And Nell Bernstein is the author of Burning Down the House, The End of Juvenile Prison. She frequently addresses the public about the impact of incarceration on young people and their families. Nell, I want to start with you. How is the super predator myth still affecting young people today?
In my book, I describe the notion of the super predator as an insult that can't be taken back. And I experienced that secondhand, but very viscerally. This notion of the super predator was conceived in the mid-90s. And at that time, I was editing a youth newspaper in San Francisco. Our office was in the financial center, but we had kids from every neighborhood. And even before this fabrication came along, it was hard for them to get to work. It was sort of a morass of purse clutching and car door clicking and street crossing. But once we were told that the coming wave of youth, and in particular the coming wave of black youth, was going to destroy us in ways we had never imagined, it got exponentially harder, just about overnight. One of my kids told me that he wasn't going to come to work anymore because the amount of energy he had to expend just to reassure people that he wasn't going to harm them on the way to work, he was beat by the time he got to work. Another young person on my staff dealt with it by having a t-shirt made that said, "No, white lady, I don't want your purse." And, you know, I always kind of, people laugh.
Those would still sell today, I would imagine.
Those are still? Those
would still sell today, I would imagine.
But you know what was different then? Nobody laughed. Things were so bad then. Communication was so limited that they would look at him, look at his shirt, and kind of exhale. That was the level of communication between young people and adults. And I think when we're conditioned to fear, it's very hard to be deconditioned. And there hasn't been, I don't think, a significant effort to decondition us.
Carmen, you were a teenager when the wave of the so-called super predator fear erupted in America. What was it like for you as a teenager?
My generation was judged based on the community that we grew up in, the people we hung out with, the clothes that we chose to wear, the music that we danced to. And it was this division between community and young people to the point where I grew up playing basketball. I grew up in a home where there was domestic violence, so any opportunity I had to be out of my home, I did. And that came with the fact that the community didn't accept us either. So We had blue warm-ups for basketball, and we were considered gang members. If you look at the picture here, I'm here with my friends, and we look like gang members. Our family members look like gang members because we were Latinos, because of the way in which the media portrayed us. And it was crippling when you walked into the store to purchase something because you were constantly being followed. And that's not a different story than the young people I work with now. But the fact that if it wasn't for the opportunities that my coach gave me, I wouldn't have had another path. My family has 5 generations of gang membership in it. My father was born in 1924, was a Pachuco. And it was because of what was happening in America that people come together. We dehumanize gangs. It's a subculture. We create these subcultures because we want to belong to something. And because of that, we also created this image of young people during the 1990s that ultimately led to a lot of these harsh punishments.
Talk to me more about your family. I mean, clearly everyone here is committed, and some folk have more skin in the game than others. For you, this is very personal.
It is very personal. I'm the youngest of 5. My oldest sibling is 14 years older than me, and since I remember, he was in and out of jail, and that was painful for our family. Getting the calls that he was locked up again was pained my mother as well as brought a lot of shame to us. And at the age of 17, I lost a sister. She was buried on my birthday. She was 19 herself, or going to be turning 19. And I grew up with the duality of the victim and the offender. And that was the first time that I learned about restorative justice, was when my sister was killed. My father had turned to my mother when the district attorney had asked what they wanted to do with the young man that took my sister's life, and my father said, "I can't take another mother's child away from her." And that's what led me to commit myself to providing opportunities for young people.
But there was another side to that, right? I mean, there was also pressure to say, we're going to take this guy out, right?
Yeah, I'm 17 years old. My brothers are older. They wanted him dead. And that's what was running through the streets. But my mother interfered in that. She interrupted a green light from going out. And so did my father, and reminded us of our humanity, reminded us that people make mistakes. And my mother didn't want him dead, nor did she want, it wasn't going to bring back her daughter. And she was very clear about that. But at 17, being young and losing my sister, losing the person I grew up with. We were born a day apart. She was 2 years older. We shared a room. We shared secrets. We shared everything. And to lose her, of course you want the person who took her life to go away and feel the pain that you feel, but it wasn't going to replace her. Yeah. And my mother did something so profound at that moment, as well as my father, that has led to my dedication to this work.
Strong parenting.
Strong parenting.
Okay. Sally, in your community in the south side of Chicago, you are mom and dad and big sister to a lot of young people. Yeah. You work in Englewood, an area known for violent crime. Why is gang involvement so magnetic for the young men there?
Well, I think a lot of it stems exactly from what Carmen just said, that wanting to have a sense of belonging, a purpose, domestic violence, and other issues that make you feel like you don't have value as a member in society.
Give us some of the statistics from that, because many of us know what life is like in tough sections of New York.
Yes. Well, Englewood actually ranks #1 for 150,000 gang members. So we lead in all the cities across the states, and as well we have the highest homicides and shootings. We've had about 300 shootings, with 41 of those killed as of last week anyway.
This isn't all of Chicago, this is just one section.
This is just Englewood. It's 45 blocks of just a lot of violence, crime. We call it our 45 blocks of hell sometimes. But there is a light in there, and there is actually community in that neighborhood, and I'm sure you experience community. Even though there are a lot of problems in your neighborhood, there's something about tragedy that does bond you to each other. And so, but when I went out there, I just saw that, I saw a big lack of intervention. Chicago is severely segregated. And I've seen a small little bit of improvement in that. But coming to New York, it's very inspiring, because New York is highly integrated, and they don't have the same crime we do and the same problems. And while I know they exist here, I don't think it's to the same degree. Whereas the racial divide, you know, and the systematic criminalization of our youth and children and the fear that feeds that, you know, is ever present.
Explain the optics to us when you show up, right? I would imagine there weren't many folk in Englewood who looked like you when you showed up saying, hey, let's box.
In the beginning, I think I've always been a little bit oblivious, and that helped me because I think I caught the radar of the police for sure. I was walking around. I was pregnant. I have 4 children of my own. And I was asking the boys on the corner with my little flowered skirt back then, you know, what would get you off the block? What would you like to do besides, you know, gangbanging? And boxing was the #1 choice they gave me.
I mean, did anyone say, get the hell out of here? What are you talking about?
One day there were a bunch of children across the street, and I was walking down a notoriously drug-infested street, and I saw them pick up a bunch of rocks. I knew they were going to throw them at me. So I decided to walk across the street, and I said to them, you know, we're all cars. We come in different shapes and models, but our hearts, to me, is the driver. I'm like, I'm probably like a Corvair, because I'm a little bit of an odd person. But I said, you guys probably think you're sleek and shiny. I said, but here's the bottom line. You can choose to throw those rocks at me, and I'm for sure going to chase you, and I'm going to catch a couple of you, and I'm going to beat you down on the block. Or, like, everybody can drop your rocks. I'll take you to the park, and I'll buy you slushies. So they all kind of looked at me, and they dropped the rocks, and we went across the street. So I think by, you know, it's all what you give credit to. I'm like, you're black, I'm white, but I've always been colorblind a little bit, you know. I experienced a lot of my friends from the north side. I moved out there 5 years ago, but I used to live on the north side, and a lot of them stopped being my friends, to be honest. You know, young men would ask me questions like, well, you would never go out with a black guy, would you? And, you know, I ended up marrying one, to be honest. And so, you know, it's kind of funny, but it was a little painful, you know, even in my own family. I had some opposition. And my father hates me to tell people this, but I'm going to tell it anyway. He tried to bribe me. Pardon me. He said, you know, I'll give you like $5 grand if you leave Englewood. And but I just told him, no, I'm not for sale. But
if he'd said 10?
You know, no, but I might have lied and said, okay, and taken the money. But anyway, I think, you know, the thing is, when you look at youth, as we all do, with a lot of love in our eyes, and as if, what if that was my child? That's always been my focus. I always thought, what if that was my child? I made a lot of poor choices as a young woman and as a youth. But I grew up in a place called Naperville where I had a support system. So I was taking my parents' car at 13 and driving it. You know, they blamed my older brothers. I continued to get in trouble, but they sought counseling for me. They had support systems. They kept trying to intervene. So I feel like, and I wasn't labeled as a criminal, even though I was doing a lot of the same things they were. So I just felt like, you know, all of us need to feel important and like we have a purpose for living and belong to something. And I saw that the gangs have more members than any program I'd ever seen, so I decided to steal their model and duplicate it, but use boxing and music instead of guns and drugs.
We're going to talk more about the music in a bit, but now I want to ask you a question. Your book proposes a provocative idea, the end of all juvenile incarceration. Say what?
Well, I have to answer that, don't I? I actually, it's a little bit of a semantic hair splitting, but I proposed the end of the juvenile prison. And I've kind of become a language freak. I'm going back to my comp lit background because technically there's no such thing as a juvenile prison. We have training schools, we have boys' academies, we have guidance centers. You won't see a sign that says juvenile prison. But when I started to go inside the locked facilities where we keep our children, I saw razor wire, I saw sally ports, I saw cells, I saw guards, I saw pepper spray. These are prisons, and they're prisons for kids. And yeah, I don't think there's any reason for them to exist. And that's not just my visceral reaction, although it did start with visiting friends and having that visceral reaction. It's something that only deepened as I got into the research. For example, I'm really glad you talked about your, what did George Bush call them? When I was young and stupid, I was young and stupid. Your own youthful misdeeds. Because it turns out that 90% of all American teenagers in confidential interviews acknowledge having done something that could get them locked up. And that surprises people, but just think a minute. Okay? See? So that tells me there's no such thing as a juvenile delinquent. It's a developmental phase. And
well, my mama would say, but there are such thing as badass kids in this world, right? So what are you to do with children who are causing trouble?
So, what would I say to your mother? Well, I would start by saying I've never met a young person for whom a double homicide or a carjacking was a first offense. They always have a track record that begins at 13 with stealing a car, or spitting on the sidewalk, or throwing a rock, or jaywalking, or a lot of things that honestly my 13-year-old white twins have done or will do.
Yes.
But then they get tracked. Somebody said this earlier, there is a great diversion program, it's called Being White, and it really does work. The kids who don't, sorry, I didn't mean that to be a laugh line either, but the kids who don't get tracked into these juvenile prisons grow up and grow out of delinquency. The ones who do face greatly increased odds of becoming adult criminals. In fact, not only, as you mentioned, is juvenile incarceration the greatest predictor of adult incarceration, that remains true when you control for everything under the sun, including the delinquent act. Even when you control for everything, being incarcerated doubles the chance that you will wind up an adult criminal and an adult prisoner.
What's the alternative?
You know, I would say start with the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. If we just stopped this intervention that is doubling the chances that kids will become adult criminals, we'd be more than halfway there. And then, you know, you talked about growing up in a resourced community. There's a concept people call justice reinvestment, which means you don't just stop the negative thing. You don't just shut the prisons and leave people to fend for themselves in the communities that have been decimated by over-incarceration. You take that money and put it back into not the community kind of vaguely envisioned, but the communities that we have drained over decades of children and of parents. And then I think it's a lot easier to come up with an answer because we really don't have the question at the level we do now.
And Carmen, you've worked inside our nation's prisons. Do you feel they're worth fixing? How can you fix them?
So I think our long-term goal is to shut down juvenile prisons or juvenile centers or whatever they're called. I volunteer inside facilities. I work with the lifers at Tracy Prison DVI in California to the youth inside the detention center in the South Bronx, Horizon. But I've also worked as a probation officer within the system. And for me, I became a probation officer because I felt if somebody only believed in my brother, if somebody had given him a chance, he would have not been in the system for 38 years. And so I personally, because of the programs that I created outside of detention for young people, I went within the system to reform the system from within. So until we could get to a place where we don't need facilities and we could deal with the badass kids, because I personally don't feel there are badass kids. And I will say what one of my mentors says, James Bow, young people are locked up because they pissed off an adult. They pissed off their mother. I remember getting threatened by my mother, I'm gonna call the cops on you. Call the cops, right? They pissed off a teacher, the school to prison pipeline. We see that now. We have resource officers, quote unquote, police officers in our schools. We have them in black and brown schools. We do not have them in white schools. And I will say, we have counselors in white schools. We contact our parents in white schools, and in black and brown schools, we have what are called police officers. So we are training young people to normalize being stopped and frisked, going through a metal detector. And so we're normalizing a behavior that should not be normalized in our communities of color. And that's a direct link. So I feel yes, I think we need to reform the system. I think we also need to hold the system accountable, and I think we need to stop incentivizing failing systems.
I was giving a statistic that surprised me. New York City now has more school police officers than social workers.
Right.
You know, if you look at the money too, I mean, in Illinois, it cost us $500 to detain a youth for 1 day, and they only spend $74 on educating children for 1 day. And the majority of them spend 20 days there. And we have 305 average every day in the system. So that actually comes out to be, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of $55 million.
And the thing about that is that the kids get the message very clearly when they see those officers that it's worth nothing to educate me, but it's worth a lot to society, the man, adults, to contain me. And, you know, kids, you think I'm a liar? All right, I'm going to lie to you. So it actually escalates the problem. And I was thinking as I listened to you, Carmen, that my answer was incomplete. Incarcerating kids, to me, doesn't work because it isolates them. And
can I add, and re-victimizes them.
And re-traumatizes kids who have been profoundly traumatized. So the alternative, which was your question, to isolation is connection. And that's what you talked about when you talked about your brother. It's what every kid said when I asked them what would have made a difference. If I had had just somebody listening to me, talking to me, walking alongside me, that would have made a difference.
Sally, your work in Chicago and Englewood is making a difference. We're going to show the audience a video. It's a portion of a music video that some of your young men put together. And on the back side, give us the backstory for that video now.
Living in Englewood, every day's a homicide. Got bodies dropping and babies dying and mamas crying.
We see people shot out here over the littlest things, over perceived insults.
On a mission to get the money, it's about the grind. This is Chicago and everybody trying to shine.
They join gangs for unconditional love, respect, sense of belonging, and most importantly, a purpose. I decided to duplicate that model and using boxing as my platform versus drugs.
It's crazy to watch your best friend die. Tears falling from your eyes cause you couldn't say goodbye. Now you're faced with the fact that you never see them again, and everything that you done told them is not going with the wind. I wanna live.
Now in here you're a boxer, in here we're all brothers. I always ask every young man I meet, you know, what's your dream?
We gotta give it all that we can give. I wanna live, I wanna live, I wanna live, I wanna live.
A lot of them don't know. I always just encourage them and say, you know, there's greatness in you. I can tell that. You're a very special young man.
The backstory to that.
Well, I was living on Morgan Street in Englewood, and a few blocks away from me, somebody had gone to the church's chicken. He was after one person, and he had one of those, I call them the machete machine guns that, you know, fire off a lot of rounds. Anyway, a lot of youth and children got hit. So I went home, and I just have always had blessed that God gave me, I feel, a lot of love for all children. So I was very disheartened, and I just kept thinking, you know, it's just everybody just wants to live out here, the children, because a common phrase I'm told is, I hope I live to be 21 so I can go to a bar, you know, but that's the reality for them. Anyway, one of the young men was on the street with a gun and had told me, I need you to go inside because we're going to start shooting. And so I, you know, made comments to him like, I should go inside, you should go inside. But anyway, I went in. And they shot, but no one got hit. So I went back out there, and I knew he was highly creative, and I believed in him. So I said, you know, I'll build you a music studio in my boxing club if you put down your gun and stop gangbanging. So I kept my word. I let him come in and build this studio. He took the verses, the poem, I should say, I wrote. They added to it. They made it into a video and a song. And about 6 months after he was working for me, because I gave him a job, he told me he had gotten rid of his gun. Now, he did say I didn't give it to the police, but I was like, I don't want to know. But he did, and to this day, he's one of my top leaders, and he is a creative genius, and they're heroes out there. You know, I put them in charge, just like the gang does, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to give them the power, you know, give them back power, and let them redeem each other. So,
a friend of mine once told me that it is easier to raise a strong boy than it is to heal a broken man.
I agree with that.
That's what you all do.
I agree with that.
Sally Hazelgrove, Carmen Perez, Nell Bernstein, ladies, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.